Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm on North Carrollton Avenue in the Sandtown neighborhood, and I'm in what has to be the newest park in Baltimore City. It was dedicated just a few weeks ago. It's now November of 2024. It gets its name after the school next door, the former school, which in turn gets its name from Frances Ellen Harper, a Baltimorean who went on to become one of those prominent and dominant figures in the abolition movement and the women's suffrage movement into the 19th century. I'm thrilled, and I'm going to be joined by a gentleman named Eric Stevenson, who is a neighbor who helped make this park possible. But before I turn it over to Eric, let me just say a word about the woman whose name this park takes. She was born in Baltimore in 1825, and sadly, both of her parents died when she was 3 years old. She went on to live with her aunt and uncle, Henrietta and William Watkins. William was a pastor at Sharp Street Church and had founded a school for black children called the Watkins Academy for Negro Youth, and that's where young Frances attended for several years. As was pretty typical of the time, at age 13 she left school to find a job. She became, among other things, a nursemaid, but she never lost her love of reading and of learning and of writing. And at age 21 she published her first short poetry series, and at age 26 she left Baltimore to become the first female instructor at an Ohio school called Union Seminary. She then went on to Pennsylvania, where she was a teacher as well. She ended up in Philadelphia, living with family friends, William and Letitia Still. William Still is often called the father of the Underground Railroad. In his long time serving as a conductor capacity, he helped upwards of 700 people escape to their freedom. And it was with the Stills that Frances really started to publish. An early poem called Eliza Harris was published in a paper called The Liberator and in Frederick Douglass's paper. A volume of poems called Poems on Miscellaneous Subjects had an introduction by none other than the noted abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison that helped vault her onto the national stage. She spent about a decade as a lecturer traveling the country talking about abolition and about women's suffrage. In one famous speech called We Are All Bound Up Together, she employed her largely white audience to accept black women in the suffrage movement, a hotly debated topic at the time and one that was fiercely fought against by many white suffragists. And then in 1859, she published a short story called The Two Offers in a paper called Anglo-African Magazine, and that made her the first black woman in America to publish a short story. She went on in 1892 to publish a novel called Iona Leroy, or Shadows Uplifted, using themes of women's education and temperance. At that time, she had joined the temperance movement. And although she wasn't the first black woman to publish a novel, she was right up as one of the very first. She spent the rest of her life traveling and advocating for civil rights, for women's suffrage, and for education of black youth, and died in Philadelphia in 1911. Today, her name is not as familiar as it once was. If we were in the 19th century, her name would have been familiar in many households, both black and white, and I will humbly suggest it should be again. All right, let me wrap up by saying a word about the school that this park is named after. It was built in 1889 as Colored School Number 9, I believe, later to become PS 111, and it was unusual in at least two ways. First, it was built as a new school for black Baltimore kids. Most of the schools back then for black youth were rented spaces. This was a brand new school built as a school, so that was pretty special. And the second is that it was one of the very few schools in Baltimore for black kids where the teachers were black as well. In most of the schools, you had white instructors with black youth. So I'm going to wrap up by saying we're now in this 1-acre green space that Eric Stevenson and a lot of folks made possible. When they went to choose a name, they didn't have to look far. They looked to the school next door, and of course the Baltimorean who went on to become of national prominence in the suffrage and abolition movements. And with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to you, Eric. We are all yours.
Hi, I'm Eric Stevenson, president of Lafayette Square CDC, and this park is one of our community greening projects. We had the ribbon cutting just a couple months ago in September on Frances Ellen Harper's birthday, but the park actually opened earlier this year in about February. It was a project many years in the making, Just 3 years ago, there were vacant houses on these sites, nuisance properties that we worked with the city initially through the Green Network Plan and Project Core to find a productive use for this space after the demolitions. When city funding shifted to other priorities, we had to work with partners such as Parks and People to realize this community vision, but we're really happy to have it here in this space. A place for residents to gather. We even salvaged some of the historic materials that came from the houses that were here, including these stoops, so people can continue to sit on them and tell stories like they always have. So the park is really heavily used by community members. Everyday hangouts, as well as events like there was a large Father's Day picnic and birthday parties. In the spring, we hope to have volunteer events to help with the planting beds, as well as some parties, maybe a market here in the field. This is just phase one of the project, which was made possible by our friends at Parks and People Foundation. Phase two hopes to add a playground for the kids, some exercise equipment, and a dog park, all things that were expressed in the community engagement process as needs. So we are in the Sandtown-Winchester neighborhood here at North Carrollton and Mosier. The best place to find out about opportunities to volunteer and to follow along with our progress is on Instagram at Our Community Garden. At Instagram, it's OUR Community Garden. And there you can see activities here at the park, as well as our garden across the street and some of our other projects.